Hello, everyone. In this video, we're going to explore the comparison function blocks available in the standard library. These function blocks are used in PLC programming to compare two values and generate a Boolean output, which means the result will be either true or false, depending on whether the comparison condition is satisfied. Let's start with the EQ operator. The EQ block is used to check if two input values are exactly the same. When both values are equal, the output becomes true. If the two values are different, the output becomes false. For example, if input A is 25 and input B is also 25, the comparison result is true because both values are identical. However, if input B changes to 30, the two values are no longer equal, so the output changes to false. This block is commonly used when we need to verify that a value has reached a specific target, such as checking if a temperature has reached a set point or confirming that two variables have the same value. Next, we have the GE operator. The GE block checks if the first input value is greater than or equal to the second input value. For example, if A is 15 and B is 10, the result is true because 15 is greater than 10. If A is 10 and B is 10, the result is also true because the two values are equal. However, if A is 8 and B is 10, the result becomes false because A is smaller than B. This block is useful when we want an action to occur once a value reaches or exceeds a certain limit, such as starting a fan when temperature reaches a defined threshold. Now let's look at the GT operator. The GT block checks if the first input value is strictly greater than the second input value. The important point here is that equal values are not accepted. For example, if A is 20 and B is 15, the output is true because 20 is greater than 15. But if A and B are both 20, the output is false because the values are equal. This operator is useful when a condition should only happen after a value exceeds a specific limit. The next comparison block is the LE operator. The LE block checks whether the first input value is less than or equal to the second input value. For example, if A is 5 and B is 10, the output is true. If A is 10 and B is also 10, the output remains true because equal values are accepted. But if A increases to 12, the output becomes false because A is now greater than B. This block is commonly used for maximum limit protection, ensuring that a value stays below or equal to a defined limit. Next is the LT operator. The LT block checks whether the first input value is strictly smaller than the second input value. For example, if A is 7 and B is 12, the output is true because 7 is less than 12. However, if both values are 12, the output becomes false because LT does not accept equal values. This block is often used for monitoring low-level conditions, minimum limits, or activating alarms when a value falls below a certain threshold. Finally, we have the NE operator. The NE block checks if two values are different. If the two inputs are not equal, the output becomes true. If both values are exactly the same, the output becomes false. For example, if A is 18 and B is 25, the output is true because the values are different. But if A and B are both 18, the output becomes false. This block is useful when detecting changes in values or checking that two variables do not have the same state.